A massive bear cradles an infant and ran into the woods, leaving a ranger paralyzed by fear and powerless. They must figure out how to confront the bear, but when he uncovers the true reason for its actions, he is overwhelmed with emotion and makes a life-altering choice that transforms his future. A massive bear cradles an infant and ran into the woods, leaving a ranger paralyzed by fear and powerless. They must figure out how to confront the bear, but when he uncovers the true reason for its actions, he is overwhelmed with emotion and makes a life-altering choice that transforms his future. The golden tendrils of the setting sun threaded through the towering pines of the Northwest Alaska National Park, casting long, shifting shadows on the frost-encrusted ground. Miller, a seasoned ranger, moved with a practiced, cautious stride, each step whispering against the brittle carpet of pine needles. His breath formed fleeting puffs of white in the biting air, dissipating as quickly as the quiet dread coiling in his gut. The news of a giant brown bear entering the village in search of food was more than a distant warning. It was a call to vigil. His sharp eyes scanned the landscape, attuned to the delicate dance of silence and sound that only a seasoned ranger could discern. Then something moved, a dark silhouette shifting just beyond the thicket. Miller's pulse quickened, a cold bead of sweat tracing down his spine. The wind carried with it the sharp, earthy scent of bear mingled with the damp chill of the approaching twilight. He squinted, trying to make sense of the shape lumbering forward. His eyes widened in stunned realization. The hulking mass of the brown bear emerged from the shadows, its fur dense and dark as the forest night. Cradled between its front paws was a bundle too small, too fragile to belong. An infant, tiny fists clenched and face peeking out from the folds of a worn blanket. Miller, God! Miller breathed the single word, escaping as a thin, tremulous gasp. Instinct rooted him to the spot, a silent observer caught between dread and disbelief. The bear's enormous frame, bristling with raw power, glistened under a patch of light as it shifted its stance. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, suspended by the rhythmic beating of his heart. The child moved, a soft whimper breaking the stillness. Miller's mind raced, cataloguing memories of encounters past, the razor-sharp claws that could cleave flesh, the guttural roars that shattered the forest's calm. He tightened his jaw. Any abrupt motion would turn this tense standoff into a death knell. Miller, steady, he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. The bear's dark eyes, deep as the forest shadows, met his for a fraction of a second. Miller's breath stilled in his throat. Was that a flicker of recognition, a shared understanding, or just the bear's instinctive awareness? The moment stretched taut as a wire. The bear lowered its head, a low rumbling sound escaping its throat. It wasn't a growl, more a murmur, a sound almost soothing as it nudged the infant gently. The baby stirred, its tiny hand brushing against the bear's coarse fur. The gesture, so incongruously tender, gnawed at Miller's nerves. Flashes of memory surged, nights when he failed to protect the life that slipped through his hands with a silence that still haunted him. The weight of that failure now pressed down on him, coiling around his chest. But he couldn't falter, not now. A sudden crack splintered the air as a branch gave way under the frost, snapping under the distant weight of snow. The bear's ears pricked up, muscles bunching, and in a heartbeat, its stance shifted from calm to charged. It swung its massive head toward Miller, eyes narrowing. The menace, once dormant, sparked alive. Miller's fingers flexed against the cold steel of his radio. He knew calling for backup might bring help, but also risk escalating the situation. He steadied his breathing, refusing to flinch under the bear's gaze. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of distant voices, fellow rangers unaware of the peril now threading the air. Miller, easy, just easy, Miller murmured, stepping back a half inch, never breaking eye contact. The bear shifted, standing to its full formidable height, its growl deep, vibrating through the marrow of Miller's bones. The baby's whimper broke into a soft cry, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. The bear glanced down, its momentary distraction a window Miller knew wouldn't last. A breath, a step, he moved, every sense alert as if the forest itself held its breath. This confrontation, teetering on the edge, could only end one way. Miller burst through the heavy wooden doors of the ranger station, the chill of the Alaskan night still clinging to his clothes. The warm light inside cast deep shadows that seemed to mock his urgency. eyes turned towards him, curious and concerned. He swallowed hard, throat raw from the cold and the weight of what he just witnessed. "Miller, there's a bear," he gasped, taking a moment to steady himself. "Miller, a brown bear with a child in its grasp. Alive, I saw it holding the child." A beat of silence, then chuckles rippled through the room, nervous at first and then more pointed. Garrett, one of the older rangers with a belly that stretched his uniform buttons, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smirk. Garrett: "Miller, you've been working too many late shifts. First the storms, now this?" His eyes narrowed. "Garrett, maybe it's time you took some time off." Miller's jaw clenched, a flicker of memory flashing behind his eyes. Soft lullabies hummed under dim nursery lights, the sudden silence, the sheer bone-crushing horror of finding his son cold and unmoving, the guilt that followed him like a shadow, darkening every day since. He pushed the memory down, meeting Garrett's gaze with a steadiness he didn't feel. "Miller, I'm not mistaken. This isn't the past haunting me. The child is real and it's in danger." The room shifted uneasily, the unspoken weight pressing down on everyone. They knew his story, the loss, the breakdowns. His wife, once a partner in the pain, now a distant figure in their shared house, drifting further away with each sleepless night he patrolled. It was easier to believe Miller was cracking than to confront the stark, impossible truth he claimed. "Chief Ross." "Enough!" came a sharp voice from the back. Chief Ross stepped forward, his boots thudding on the old floorboards. Tall and broad-shouldered, Ross carried the authority of years spent navigating the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. He stopped inches from Miller, eyes scrutinizing the man before him. "Chief Ross, did you call this in?" Ross asked, a trace of disbelief seeping through. Miller: "No, there was no time. I came straight here." Ross sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Chief Ross, you know what this looks like, right? After everything." The sting of those words was sharp. Miller took a step back, heart thudding like the wings of a trapped bird. "Miller, this is different, Chief. I need you to trust me." But Ross turned away, the conversation over. "Chief Ross, get some rest, Miller. We'll keep an eye out, but there's nothing more to do tonight." A thin thread of despair wrapped tighter around Miller's chest. He glanced around the room, searching for a hint of support, but only found averted eyes and shifting feet. The fluorescent hum of the lights above seemed louder than ever, droning like an accusation. Without another word, Miller stormed out. The night air bit at his face as he leaned against the cold metal of his truck. Stars flickered overhead, indifferent and silent. The helplessness that he had fought so hard to bury surged up once more. "Miller. Damn it," he whispered, the frustration spilling out in ragged breaths. But then came resolve, hard and unyielding. If no one would listen, he would go alone. He fumbled for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed the police. It rang once, twice before a voice answered. He reported everything, recounting the glistening eyes of the bear, the tiny bundle so vulnerable in its massive grasp. Minutes passed, and soon the red and blue flashes of a patrol car illuminated the dark, silent forest. Officers stepped out, eyes sharp and skeptical. One, a young woman with a badge that glinted under the starlight, nodded briskly at Miller. "Officer, where?" Miller gestured to the tree line. "Miller, out there. I know where it was heading." Before she could respond, Chief Ross appeared behind them, face stony. He whispered something to the officer, whose expression shifted from tense to resigned. "Officer, we've got it from here. You need to go home." Miller opened his mouth to protest, but Ross's eyes silenced him. Defeated but not broken, he nodded once. The forest loomed behind him, dark and inscrutable, daring him to step back into its shadow. As the officers moved away, Miller knew this wasn't the end. The next move would be his, and he would make it alone. The air was thick with the icy embrace of dawn as Miller stepped outside. The world was silent save for the whispering wind and the occasional rustle of branches. A few stars lingered stubbornly, glinting like shards of shattered glass against the velvet sky. His boots crunched over frostbitten gravel, each step a reminder of the resolve hardening in his chest. Carlos's cabin stood at the edge of the park, its wooden facade dark and unwelcoming in the pre-dawn gloom. Miller rapped his knuckles against the door, urgency reverberating through the stillness. "Miller, Carlos." Carlos appeared, eyes shadowed with fatigue. The scent of coffee lingered faintly in the air behind him, mingling with the scent of pine. "Carlos, it's barely morning. Miller, I need your help, Carlos." Miller cut him off, his voice tight with desperation. The light from the cabin cast a soft glow over his weathered face, accentuating the lines etched from sleepless nights. "Miller, the bear. It's real, and it's got a baby." Carlos's brows knitted in disbelief. "Carlos? A baby? You're not serious." "Miller, I am. You know I wouldn't come to you if I wasn't." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and unyielding. Carlos sighed, the doubt in his eyes softening as he took in the anguish radiating from his friend. "Carlos, all right." He finally relented, grabbing his coat. "Carlos. But if this goes sideways, Miller, you owe me." The two men made their way into the heart of the forest, their movements synchronized with the rhythm of a landscape they knew as well as their own scars. The crunch of snow and the echo of their breathing were the only sounds punctuating the silence. Each shadow, each whisper of wind bending the branches seemed laden with unseen menace. Carlos glanced at Miller, tension pulling at his features. "Carlos, you really think it's true? That there's a baby out here?" "Miller, I saw it," Miller affirmed, the memory vivid and raw. The gleam of the bear's eyes, the small figure clutched tenderly within its paws. He didn't mention how the sight had awakened an old ache buried beneath layers of stoic resolve. His jaw clenched against the flash of memory. A nursery room, soft moonlight spilling over a crib that would never be filled. Suddenly, Carlos halted, his eyes narrowing at a disturbance in the snow, the unmistakable arc of giant paw prints. The two exchanged a glance, comprehension dawning in Carlos's expression, his skepticism fractured like a sheet of ice underfoot. A low, rumbling growl rolled through the stillness, so deep it seemed to tremble in their chests. Miller raised a hand, signaling silence as they moved further into the underbrush, breath suspended. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by a sound that made Miller's heart constrict. A soft, human whimper. Beyond a ridge, nestled beneath a thicket of twisted branches, was the mouth of a cavern. It yawned open, black and ominous like the maw of a beast. Inside, bathed in the muted bluish glow of dawn, a massive brown bear stood guard. Its dense fur rippled as it shifted, revealing the small, pale face of a baby nestled against its chest. Carlos drew in a sharp breath. "Carlos, dear God, it's true." The bear nuzzled the child, its wet snout brushing over the baby's head with an almost maternal gentleness. The child stirred, and a soft coo escaped its lips. The bear's eyes, deep and unreadable, swept across the cavern before it settled back to its unlikely charge. In the clearing was palpable. Each man knew that one wrong move would be met with lethal consequences. Miller whispered, his eyes fixed on the creature. The sight defied every natural law, but there was no mistaking the protective posture of the animal. The bear shifted again, curling around the child as if to shield it from the biting Alaskan cold. Miller suddenly realized the bear appeared to be nursing the child from its breast. Before Miller could reply, the bear had disappeared into the deep woods. Miller was about to chase after it when Carlos grabbed his hand. The sun dipped low, painting streaks of amber and violet across the sky as the forest thickened around Miller and Carlos. Twisted roots clawed at their boots, and the dense canopy above swallowed their breath, leaving only the haunting calls of distant birds to pierce the silence. The air felt charged, sharp as the blade of a knife. Miller knelt, fingers brushing over the massive fresh paw prints pressed into the frost. Each step led further into the shadows, deeper into the heart of a story that refused to let them go. Carlos's voice trembled, eyes darting between the trees that seemed to lean in, listening. He adjusted the strap of his gear, the leather creaking as if in protest. Miller turned, the crease between his brows deepening. His eyes softened for a moment, a flash of memories slipping through, the gentle weight of his own son in his arms, the gurgle of laughter that used to fill his home. Guilt and purpose wove together in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't fail again. The two moved as one, a practiced dance honed through years of patrols. Each step deliberate and silent, the earthy scent of moss and cold rock grew stronger. Suddenly, the landscape opened up to reveal a cave, its maw dark and unforgiving. tucked beneath a tangle of branches that reached like skeletal fingers. Miller's pulse quickened. This was it. From inside, a muffled, wavering cry broke through the hush. The sound clawed at Miller's composure, and he surged forward, pulling out his phone to cast a cone of light into the abyss. "Carlos, Miller, this is a mistake. We need to—" "Miller, shh." Miller cut him off, eyes fixed on the cave's entrance. The soft cries had stopped, replaced by the heavy silence that bore the weight of something watching. Then came the shift of gravel, the thud of paws. The ground quivered, and Miller felt it before he saw it. Emerging from the black, a pair of glistening eyes appeared, set wide on a massive fur-covered head. The bear's breath fogged in the dim light, its gaze sweeping over them, muscles coiling beneath its shaggy coat. "Carlos, don't move," Miller whispered, though his voice wavered. Every second felt stretched taut with the promise of violence. The bear's ears pricked forward, its lips drawing back to reveal teeth like polished ivory. Carlos's hand twitched reflexively, and the beast growled, a sound deep and resonant, a vibration that rumbled through the bones. Miller, a gesture of truce. The bear did not charge, but stood guard as if defending something precious within the cave's depth. A flash of realization struck him. The bear wasn't just a threat, it was a guardian. But the child, where was it? The silence fractured as a soft whimper drifted from behind the beast. Miller's eyes darted to the sound, and the bear's attention followed, glancing back towards the cave's recess. It was all the opportunity he needed. Miller murmured, locking eyes with his friend. The tension splintered between them, an unspoken understanding. Miller took a cautious step forward, inching towards the shadowed edge, heart pounding like war drums. "Carlos, be careful," Carlos whispered, voice barely there. The bear's body tensed, eyes narrowing as it pivoted to face Miller once more, growl deepening. A second longer moment stretched, and the world seemed to shrink to the beat of Miller's heart and the shuddering breaths of the beast. In that suspended instant, man and animal faced off, neither willing to yield but both bound by the fragile thread of an unspoken truce. Carlos's boots scuffed the frozen earth as he took an involuntary step back, eyes locked on the massive silhouette just ahead. The bear's ears twitched, muscles beneath its thick brown fur rippling with alertness. For a moment the clearing held its breath. Then, as if sensing a challenge, the bear swung its head around, dark eyes narrowing on Carlos. "Miller, get out of there!" Miller's voice cut through the silence, but it was too late. The bear surged forward, a wall of muscle and power moving faster than seemed possible. Carlos's pulse roared in his ears as he pivoted, feet finding purchase on the gnarled roots of an old spruce. He scrambled up, the bark biting into his palms. Below, the bear reared, slashing at the tree, growling so deeply that the sound resonated in Carlos's chest. Miller seized the moment. His heartbeat drummed a staccato rhythm against his ribs as he dashed toward the mouth of the cave. The cold air stung his face, sharp with the scent of pine and frost, but the adrenaline coursing through him drowned out all discomfort. The cave loomed dark and cavernous, with shadows that twisted and shuddered in the dim light. Just beyond the threshold, a soft whimper drifted out, a child's sound, vulnerable. "Oh, hold on, little one," Miller whispered, breathless inside. The scene unfolded like a fever dream. The child lay nestled in a makeshift bed of dry leaves, small limbs shifting as they caught sight of Miller. A giggle, light and unknowing of the danger, bubbled from their lips. Relief washed over Miller in a wave so powerful it nearly staggered him. The child was unharmed. He reached out, fingers brushing the soft fabric of their shirt. But then, as if sensing the change in the air, the baby's giggle faltered. Their lips trembled, eyes watering before a piercing cry split the silence. Miller flinched, heart sinking as the sound echoed against the stone walls. The rumble of heavy steps outside the cave grew louder. The bear, its charge against Carlos abandoned, was returning. Miller ducked into a corner, half hidden by jagged rocks and the dark cloak of shadow. He held his breath as the bear lumbered back inside, its eyes wide and frantic. A low, mournful sound, more a hum than a growl, emanated from its chest as it approached the child. To Miller's astonishment, the beast lowered its head, gently nudging the crying baby with surprising tenderness. The child's cries softened into soft whimpers, and Miller's throat constricted with something unnameable. This was no mindless predator. This was an ancient guardian, fierce and nurturing. Why? Why would it do that? Miller's whisper barely broke the silence, but his mind raced, torn between awe and duty. Before he could ponder further, a sharp whistle split the air from outside. The backup team had arrived, their footsteps crunching the frost-laden earth, urgency radiating through the walls of the cave. The bear's ears pricked, muscles tensing once more. It turned, nostrils flaring as the unmistakable scent of human invaded its space. The tranquilizer darts struck with soft thuds, one after another, embedding into the bear's flank. It roared, a sound full of defiance and despair, before swaying unsteadily on its feet. Time seemed to slow as the creature fought the numbing pull of the sedative, eyes flicking to the child one last time before its legs buckled, and it crumpled onto the floor. "Now!" Carlos shouted, having climbed down and joined the others at the cave entrance. Miller moved, heart pounding, gathering the baby into his arms. The child blinked up at him, tiny fists reaching instinctively, and a warm, relieved smile spread across Miller's face. "Gotcha," he said, voice thick with emotion. He pushed past the team, stepping out into the chill of the open air, the sky now tinged with the first hues of dawn. Behind him, the once ferocious guardian lay subdued, a testament to the unexpected bond that had saved a life. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed, their cold, sterile glow pooling over white linoleum and sterile walls. Miller sat on the rigid chair outside the pediatric room, his eyes locked on the tiny figure nestled under crisp white sheets. The baby's breaths were shallow, each rise and fall of its chest a silent testament to the miracle of its survival. Miller hadn't moved in hours, his exhaustion clawing at him with sharp, relentless fingers. But he refused to look away. The shadow of guilt and a protective instinct once dormant now surged in his veins like wildfire. A nurse approached, clipboard clutched tightly. "Sir, you need rest," she said softly, glancing at the dark circles under Miller's eyes. He barely registered her presence. "I'll rest when he's safe." The nurse sighed, eyes softening with unspoken understanding. This man, rugged and stoic, sat there as if the child was a lifeline to something he'd lost long ago. In another wing, whispers of concern gathered like storm clouds. The bear, captured and transported to a secure enclosure within the park's protected facility, had become increasingly agitated. Veterinarians monitored it closely, its heaving sides and restless pacing a worrying sight. Dr. Rowe, the lead veterinarian, glanced nervously at the reinforced bars as the bear let out another low, mournful cry. "Why is it doing that?" a young assistant whispered, eyes wide with fear. The bear, instead of growling in fury, seemed to call out, each sound a mix of desperation and grief. It pawed at the bars, claws scraping with a metallic screech that sent shivers down their spines. Miller's phone vibrated in his pocket, startling him from the trance. The voice on the other end was hurried. "Miller, you need to come now. The bear, it's acting unusual." A chill ran down his spine. He nodded, though no one was there to see it, and rose from the chair, bones protesting with fatigue. "I'll be right there." The facility's air was thick with tension, the kind that settled deep in your chest and made breathing feel like a labor. Miller pushed through the swinging doors and was met with frantic eyes. The bear's powerful body crashed against the reinforced sides of its enclosure, muscles rippling as it fought an unseen battle. But there was something different about its ferocity, a purpose behind the rage. Dr. Rowe met Miller at the edge of the room. "It's been like this for hours, and we don't know how to calm it." Miller's gaze locked onto the animal's dark eyes that now brimmed with something raw and ancient. He understood in that moment this was not mere animal rage. It was the wild echo of loss. His heart constricted. "The child. I'll be back," he said to Dr. Rowe and ran out. 30 minutes later, Miller returned with the baby in his arms. "Open the observation window." The guards exchanged hesitant looks. "Sir, we can't just..." His voice cut through the noise like a blade. He rushed to the nearest window, holding the baby close, the warmth of its tiny body seeping into his tired arms. The bear stilled, every muscle freezing as its head turned, ears flicking forward. The moment their eyes met, the room went deathly silent. The bear's gaze dropped to the child, and an emotion unfathomable in such a creature passed through its eyes. Relief. It lowered itself slowly, paws resting on the concrete floor, and a long, shuddering exhale swept through its massive frame. "Miller," softly, voice trembling with exhaustion and newfound understanding. "He's safe. I promise you, he's safe." A muffled gasp came from one of the assistants, but no one dared interrupt the fragile moment. The bear sat back on its haunches, the anger that had filled the space now replaced with quiet surrender. It rumbled low, a sound not of threat but of trust. As the child shifted in Miller's arms, a tiny sound, cool, soft and unafraid, broke the stillness. Miller pressed a kiss to the child's forehead and looked at the bear, meeting its gaze with the weight of a vow. "Miller, I'll take care of him. You have my word." The bear blinked, a slow, deliberate gesture, and lowered its head. The wildness that had filled the room receded, leaving behind only the solemn truth of bonds forged in the crucible of survival. Miller stood in the hospital. Days had passed since he had risked everything to rescue the child from the bear's den. He hadn't slept more than a handful of hours, too restless to close his eyes for long, haunted by the memory of the child's wide, tear-brimmed eyes and the bear's low, protective growl. His mind spun endlessly between worry and hope. "Officer Carter, Mr. Miller," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Officer Carter, her expression a mixture of sympathy and solemnity. "Officer Carter, we have the DNA results." He nodded, throat tight, as he followed her to a small room lined with official reports and maps of the park's sprawling wilderness. The child who had survived against all odds under the watchful care of a wild bear was now seated on a chair, eyes curiously following Miller's every movement. The nurse hovered near, her kind smile unwavering, but the weight in the room was palpable. Carter sighed and shifted a file in her hands. "Officer Carter, the results confirm that there are no known family members to claim the boy. His parents were found victims of a car crash near the park's edge 3 days ago." Carter continued, her voice breaking through his trance. "Officer Carter, the child survived alone until the bear found him. It kept him warm, fed, even protected him from other predators." The incredulity in her voice was matched by a soft gasp from the nurse. Miller's eyes flickered to the child, who now reached out a tiny hand toward him, as if sensing a familiar spirit. Emotions churned in Miller's chest, a strange mixture of grief, awe, and an overwhelming surge of responsibility. "Nurse, what will happen to him now?" The nurse's question hung in the air, delicate and pressing. Carter exhaled, folding her arms as she looked at the child. "Officer Carter, we've checked, but no relatives have come forward. The state will step in if necessary." "Miller." "No." The words were out of Miller's mouth before he could stop them. He felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. "Miller. He shouldn't be in an orphanage, not after everything he's been through." "Officer Carter, Miller, are you saying he should be with someone who understands?" "Miller. My wife and I, we lost our son last year. I know what it's like to lose, but maybe this is a chance to give him what we couldn't give our own." A hush enveloped the room, broken only by the soft, uneven breaths of the boy. The nurse's eyes shone with unshed tears, and Carter's steely demeanor softened. Miller crouched to the child's level, searching those innocent eyes for some kind of approval, some recognition that this was right. The boy tilted his head as if studying Miller with a depth beyond his years. Tentatively, a small smile curved his lips. "Miller, I'll take care of you," Miller whispered, the promise hanging in the air like a lifeline. The boy reached for him, and Miller felt his heart, scarred and heavy, begin to mend. Flashbacks surged in the corners of his mind, the soft giggle of his son, the quiet moments reading stories by the fireplace. For the first time since that night of unimaginable loss, hope flickered in the dark. "Officer Carter, then there are procedures, of course, but if you and your wife are serious..." "Miller." "We are." Miller's voice was steady now, rooted in something unshakable. He straightened, eyes fixed on the future and the life they could build. This was not just redemption, it was rebirth. A child who survived against nature's fiercest test now had the chance for a new beginning, as did Miller. And as he took the boy into his arms, the silent forest outside seemed to exhale in relief. A quiet blessing whispered through the trees. Miller sat in the glow of the early morning light that streamed through the thin curtains of their modest home. The room, once steeped in shadows and silence, now hummed with soft sounds, tiny giggles, a whispered lullaby from his wife Eliza, and the rustle of blankets. Life had returned to their home, The once cold and empty nursery now cradled a child, warm and full of promise. Their past, marked by the loss that had nearly crushed them, began to fade as hope seeped into their lives again. "Eliza, look at him, Miller," Eliza murmured, brushing her hand over the baby's small, downy head. Her voice, once taut with grief, now softened with awe. "Miller, he's perfect," he replied, the words breaking with quiet emotion. The memory of their son, the one they had lost, stirred but did not overwhelm. Instead, it mingled with the present, reshaping his grief into something he could hold without shattering. The knock at the door startled them both. Miller rose, feeling the creak of the wooden floor beneath him, and opened the door to find Jacob, his longtime friend and fellow ranger. Jacob's eyes, once skeptical and wary, now glimmered with warmth. "Jacob, thought I'd find you here," Jacob said, stepping inside. His gaze fell on the child and a soft smile curved his lips. "Jacob, the whole team's talking, you know," Jacob said, stepping inside. "They're calling you a hero." Miller, chuckling dryly. "A hero? I did what anyone would do. Jacob, not anyone would have faced down a bear with nothing but a flashlight and sheer stubbornness," Jacob countered, the admiration in his voice unmissable. "Jacob, and not anyone would have the heart to see the truth in what that bear did." A thoughtful silence hung between them. The memory of that fateful encounter replayed in Miller's mind. The snarl of the wind, the bear's fierce eyes softening as it guarded the child. It had been more than an act of instinct. It had been an act of protection. The days that followed were marked by gestures Miller hadn't anticipated. The park rangers gathered for a small ceremony, recognizing Miller not just for his bravery, but for his compassion. The local paper heralded him as Hero of the Year, a title that felt foreign on his lips when Eliza read it aloud. "Thank you," Miller said at the gathering, standing under the crisp blue sky with the crowd's eyes on him. He shifted the weight of their gazes, heavy yet humbling. "But this honor belongs to someone else. It belongs to the bear who showed us that even in the wildest heart, there is room for kindness." A murmur rippled through the group, some nodding, others exchanging surprised looks. But in that moment, Miller's eyes sought out the forest beyond the clearing, the line of trees that concealed the creature who had been more guardian than predator. When it came time to release the bear back into the wild, Miller felt an ache in his chest, a strange blend of gratitude and farewell. They stood at the edge of the clearing. The bear's massive form shifted as it rose, blinking in the late afternoon light. It turned its dark eyes, meeting Miller's one last time. Eliza approached with the baby cradled securely in her arms. Miller's throat tightened as he stepped forward, lifting the child so that the bear could see him. "Goodbye, old friend," Miller whispered, the wind carrying his voice toward the forest. The bear hesitated a moment, suspended in time, before it lumbered away back to the depth of the woods, leaving behind only footprints and the whispers of a legend. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. Miller wrapped an arm around Eliza's shoulders, drawing her close as their new son sat contentedly in her embrace. Together they watched the bear's silhouette meld into the shadows, a guardian now freed from its duty, but never forgotten. As the last rays of sunlight danced over their faces, Miller felt a profound sense of peace settle within him. This was the new chapter, the promise of a future unmarked by fear but filled with strength, love, and the memory of a protector that had bridged the worlds of the wild and the human heart. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the unexpected bonds that can form between the wild and the human heart. If this story touched you as it did me, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with those who love a powerful story of hope and redemption. And remember, sometimes heroes come in the most surprising forms, whether it's a ranger who refuses to give up or a bear whose instincts transcend its nature. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary world we live in and the hope that lies even in the darkest moments. Thanks for watching.